Welcome to Autoimmune Secrets. I'm your host, Jonathan Otto. In our first episode, we went through an overview of autoimmune disorders in general. Today, we'd like to look into more specific issues such as lupus, arthritis, and thyroid conditions. Often, many of these conditions appear simultaneously. One contributes to the other. So if we get down to the root cause and understand the true source of these symptoms, then we can really begin to tackle the problem and find hope for recovery.
The thyroid is gaining a lot of attention. There's doctors out there like Dr. Barnes who says that 90%, and this is huge, 90% of men and women in America have subclinical hypothyroid, meaning they're actually exhibiting some symptoms, but they don't know that there's actually lower functioning thyroid. 90%. And then of that 90%, majority of those are women, 80 to 90% are mostly women. And of those, 80 or 90% of those are autoimmune. So when you start extrapolating that, it's like, okay, a ton of people have thyroid issues. Most of them are women. And a lot of it's autoimmune. It's like, the stats seem pretty high, but I think the foundation really allows us to look at and say, okay, thyroid's a big deal right now in our society. Thyroid's a big issue in our country, really across the globe. Thyroid's big for, basically your metabolism, your energy level, hair, skin. There's so many things that it actually plays a role with. So oftentimes, thyroid will show people that can't lose weight, hormonally related. Thyroid can be affected with that. Then you have this other classification of the, chronically ill and they're underweight and they're worried, I can't fast or I can't do anything because I don't want to lose more weight. So you have this spectrum, and thyroid fits really into that niche. So how do you know if you have a thyroid disease or a thyroid condition? You can simply go and get some blood work done and get tested for it. Now, there are signs and symptoms. The face is really a great place to look at signs and symptoms. If you're missing the outer third of your eyebrows, thyroid type symptom, that's a nice one to look at. But when you go in, you can have some blood work done. Blood work, the standard blood work that they run is TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, which when I look at that, I'm like, wait a minute, the TSH isn't even produced by the thyroid. So some doctors will only use TSH as a marker for thyroid, but it's actually not even produced by the thyroid. It's very interesting. So TSH is basically produced by the pituitary in the brain to then signal to the thyroid, hey, do something, go do some work, go produce hormones, T4, T3. So your thyroid produces T4 and then it will produce a small amount of T3. Majority though of the T4 will get converted to T3 in the liver. So when we're looking at thyroid, it's not just about the thyroid. So often I see clinically that the liver is actually a fundamental issue of why people have thyroid problems, that they can't convert T4 to T3. So fixing the liver is a big thing, and we can get into more of that. But when you're running blood work, you want to look at TSH, you want to look at T4 and T3, and there's two different types. There's free, F-R-E-E, and then also total. So free T3, free T4, total T4, total T3, and then you're looking again TSH. You want to look at reverse T3, that goes high typically in chronic infection or body's chronically stressed out, so reverse T3. And then the other two things you want to look at are antibodies like TG, TPO antibodies. And if the antibodies are high, then that usually signals autoimmunity. But so what I think about with my wife, when she was pregnant with my daughter, started having some heart palpitations. This was either the second or beginning of third trimester, started having some issues, and we're like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? There's a baby inside you. Went in, got tested, came up Hashimoto's. Antibodies for thyroid were elevated. We're like, oh great, now we have an autoimmune condition going on. And then she actually had an ultrasound done on her thyroid that showed nodules as well. So there's multiple things that you can do to look at it, but I think if you just run a complete thyroid panel, that's a good foundation to detect, does somebody, Jonathan, actually have thyroid disease or a condition or not?
So in my case, I got my first autoimmune condition when I was 14. Spent the first half of my 20s chasing a condition, being told it was all in my head, and my second half of my 20s collecting disease labels. So I had 6 autoimmune conditions by 30. I was heavily medicated, And after 10 years of being sick, my doctor's team told me that they had great news, and then proceeded to tell me that I wasn't going to die in the immediate future. I was a CEO for a company at the time, and I thought to myself, if I went to my board of advisors and told them we're not going to go bankrupt in the immediate future, I don't think I have a job. So I said, what are we going to do about my process? And I was told that that was not what they were doing, and they were happy with my numbers. I'm an economist by training and a little autistic with numbers. So to me, that just didn't cut it. I was seeing like these numbers for the last years in my head, and I was like, wow. And of course I didn't think I was going to be able to change anything, but I was so disempowered as a patient that I went home and I turned to the one thing that I'd always kind of been able to rely on, which was numbers. And it was pre-apps and it was pre-quantified self and all these things, and I started charting everything that I did. And at night I would put it into Excel spreadsheets. I built an algorithm, and basically from looking at correlations between what I did and my symptoms, I proved in 5 months that I wasn't a cardiac patient. And then proceeded to think, well, if I could get rid of my first label, I can probably get rid of everything. And it took me 16 months in total, but I basically tinkered my way, or hypothesis tested my way out of all of my conditions, got off my Humira, got off the different drugs, and basically was able to normalize my blood work. And here we are 6 years later. I've not taken any drugs, and I'm perfectly fine and happy, and probably healthier in my 40s than I was in my 20s.
It's amazing.
Thank you. Well, it was funny, every time I go into a meeting, my COO says, mention that grandmother. And it's a woman that was so sick when we started seeing her that her husband took the first 2 appointments. I don't know if you've ever gone over someone else's bowel movement with a practitioner, but it was pretty weird. And at the same time, he was so informed that I thought, wow, he's really been, helping her out at a very intimate level, because otherwise he wouldn't know all the stuff that he knows. And then 10 weeks later, when I called her for a follow-up, she was winded when she picked up the phone, and she said, can I call you back in 5 minutes? And I double-checked the list like 3 or 4 times, because I was like, that cannot be the same woman. And by the time she called me back, I said, so how are you feeling? And she goes, oh great, I was taking care of my grandsons. And I thought to myself, wow, it's like amazing that you can see these turnarounds in people's lives. And in her case, it was very, very basic. And I think that's what we're seeing over and over. It's very basic interventions.
So tell me what she was experiencing. So she was so sick, she was not able to come to the appointment, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what was she experiencing?
So in her case,
what was her disease?
She has lupus. We're focusing a lot on lupus. She had occurred 4 strokes. She had gone through a lot of different, pre-diabetes, whatever. It's always, by the time I see people, they always have at least 4 different diagnoses. But I think in her particular case, and what we see quite a lot, when people have a lot of medications, they stop eating as much. They don't hydrate, or if they hydrate, they do it with sugary liquids. And there was just a lot of bad lifestyle behavior that went into producing these symptoms. And when she started working with us, her goal was to cook a meal for her family once a week. And I said to her, no, this is blue sky. You can, tell me anything that you want to get out of this program. And she said, well, it's been so long since I've been able to do that for me that would actually be a huge accomplishment. And 6 weeks later, no, actually not 6, 10 weeks later, she was babysitting her grandsons. And of course she was exhausted. Who wouldn't be? But at the same time, she was able to do it. This woman will never get back to the workforce, but it also doesn't matter, because she's going to be able to be there for her family and for her grandsons, which is going to make a huge change in their world.
I was gluten-free, dairy-free, ate really well, exercised, did all of that.
And then one day in August, what happened?
I woke up with a stiff neck and I couldn't turn, even my neck, even a slight little bit, and I couldn't bend my hands or my wrists, and I felt frozen. And I looked to my husband, and it was so painful, like instantly I couldn't move without pain. It was just awful.
Right.
And it was really scary,
Yes.
to just wake up, go to bed one night, wake up the next morning and kind of go, what? And what happened?
Right. It just progressed so quickly.
So fast. It went from in September, in August, going to Branson, Missouri, and being on inner tubes in the water and enjoying myself and hiking, and I could do everything. And then progressively from August, September until by Christmas, I was unable to dress myself, shampoo my hair. I couldn't drive a car. I couldn't make a single meal for myself. It was so scary because overnight I saw my hands transform from these little dainty hands to really thick, knobby fingers and swollen wrists and in a lot of pain.
In a lot of pain.
I couldn't touch. I couldn't pull my pants up. It was just awful.
And can you just show me like what you're able to do?
So now I can go like this. I want to be able to do a full heart. That's my goal. Is I can take them and but you know I had huge sacs of inflammation here, and so while I've been here, they put potato poultices on my hands. So I'd go to bed every night and they'd have ground up potato wrapped around my fingers and my wrists, and the swelling went down.
Isn't that amazing? It's like the
Potatoes
first
from the garden.
day. I know. How are you feeling? Like, how does the rest of you feel? Because I felt like you were moving around really, really well today.
I feel terrific, and it's only been 6 days, and the greatest gift I've been given here is a roadmap to victory, overcoming rheumatoid, where the contrast was the doctor told me you will, you know, your hands are going to get all deformed and your ankles will, and you won't be able to walk. And I was weak and I was tired and I was feeling, because when someone goes through autoimmune, it's really, really a lonely journey.
It is.
And it's so scary because you're just watching your body change. Now I'm watching my body change in the reverse direction.
Yes.
And I'm just filled with joy. I'm so grateful on this day.
Learning is all a part of the autoimmune journey. Educating yourself on autoimmune disease in general, as well as your specific condition, helps you to become a more savvy, informed patient who can best advocate for yourself during a healthcare appointment. Since we aren't ignoring conventional medicine or your doctor's advice, this is incredibly important as it helps you to be proactive and guide the medical side of treating your autoimmune disease.
Right? So when we look at the progenesis, where does rheumatoid arthritis come from? There's this concept, Jonathan, called molecular mimicry. Okay, molecular mimicry means when the gut is leaking. So think of your gut, it's a quarantine zone. The gut is a tube and it's supposed to keep bad things out and let good things in. What happens with molecular mimicry is that the gut is sprung holes. There's microscopic pinholes in your gut. So all the garbage from the food, all the waste, is leaking in. And sometimes what happens is proteins from bacteria and proteins from yeast also leak in, and some of these proteins look like human tissue. And in some cases, some of the bacteria, especially certain bacteria like Klebsiella and Pseudomonas, these are species of bacteria that produce proteins that look like our joints, right? So these proteins, these bacterial proteins can leak into the bloodstream through that leaky gut, being caused by the methotrexate, right? And the immune system starts to attack them because it looks at them and it says, these are foreign. But over time, what it says is, hey, these look like our joints. Let's attack the joints too because they look the same. That's molecular mimicry. So the molecules that are leaking through the leaky gut mimic the joints and they perpetuate the autoimmune response. And until you stop that gut from leaking, you know, and whatever's causing it, whether it's a medication that you're on or whether it's, you know, that you're eating the wrong food or plastics. Plastics can cause a leaky gut. Eating or drinking out of plastics can cause a leaky gut. So it doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. You've got to stop that process, to stop the molecular mimicry, to calm down the immune system long enough so that the joints can begin the process of healing and repairing so you can get that patient back to stable and normal. And that's what we had to do with Anne. But her story is an amazing turnaround from not functional to completely functional, and being able to be a mom and being able to do CrossFit and being able to do the things that she really wanted to do.
So we've been seeing various results with a ketogenic diet. People are noticing, for instance, we've got a rheumatoid arthritis patient, and she was noticing that she was kind of stuck on methotrexate, and she didn't want to be stuck on methotrexate, and she had actually quit it on her own before she had even come to see us, and she was looking to get healthier and finally, for once and for all, reverse the rheumatoid arthritis and get her symptoms under control without a toxic medicine like methotrexate. And so she kicked into ketogenesis fairly quickly, and I won't say that she experienced full resolution of symptoms, but she noticed a dramatic improvement in her inflammatory levels and how much her arthritis was hurting, how much it was waking her up in the middle of the night. Adrenal dysfunction is another common thing. That's probably my number one thing that I'm talking to every patient about, especially in America. Americans are typically burning the candle at both ends. Our cortisol levels are high, and cortisol is the exact opposite of ketogenesis. When cortisol levels are high, it's actually forcing the liver to make more sugar, and it causes the brain to even crave more sugar, which makes sense because in a high cortisol state, that's your high stress state. And if you're running from a lion, now's not the time to eat steak and fat. Now's the time to find a sugar source so you can quickly get energy. So when we kick people into ketogenesis with adrenal dysfunction, all of a sudden the body stops being inflamed, cortisol levels come down, and really it's kind of a whole body reset. So if you're not familiar with adrenal dysfunction, most people that struggle with adrenal dysfunction have fatigue, especially the afternoon fatigue, really restless sleep, salt cravings, sugar cravings. And so when they kick into ketogenesis, many of those symptoms get better almost immediately. Now it takes months for the true adrenal dysfunction to reset, but as long as you can get symptom improvement in people at least quickly, then they're likely to believe all the other things that they need to institute.
But nutritional deficiencies can cause or trigger autoimmune disease or make existing autoimmune disease worse. So it's something that absolutely needs to be evaluated. Glyphosate, before it was a pesticide, was used as a chelating agent to strip metals. So it strips metals from the human body just as well as it strips metals from plants and weeds and kills them. So,
And it's taking the good metals from the body, is that right?
Yeah. Especially one of the metals it can rob the body of is selenium. Now, selenium, one of its functions is in thyroid. And look at how many thyroid prescriptions are written in the United States alone. I mean, it's one of the top medications in the world. But selenium is necessary to convert thyroid hormone. So T4, which is inactive thyroid hormone, to be able to convert it to the active form of thyroid hormone, which is T3, requires an enzyme that is selenium driven. So if you are exposing somebody to a chelating agent that's stripping their body away of selenium, they can actually become hypothyroid. And selenium deficiency can trigger autoimmune thyroid disease.
Unfortunately, one of the solutions the medical community has developed for dealing with thyroid issues is to remove the thyroid. This extreme practice causes the patient to have to be on constant hormone replacement therapy for life with synthetic drugs that can cause other health issues. Is this really even a solution, or is it just bypassing the issue of taking the time to look at the body and figure out what is really going wrong? Functional medicine doctors and many holistic professionals have been able to see many patients with thyroid conditions be able to reverse their abnormalities and live healthy lives with little to no medication. If it's possible to overcome these conditions, then why are we using surgery and pharmaceuticals to try to either cut out the problem or patch it up with a Band-Aid?
It really comes down to if you've had your thyroid removed, like completely removed, then there's not that organ really to produce the thyroid hormones needed, and then you get basically stuck being a lifetime customer, Synthroid, levothyroxine, then people usually will switch to Armour. And what's interesting about Armour from a pharmaceutical manufacturing side of it, it's oftentimes made with gluten, which gluten has the molecular mimicry to actually negatively affect the thyroid. So when you're looking at what do you have to take if you're having to be on something, obviously you want to find a thyroid expert and somebody that can help really monitor your thyroid levels, give you the right stuff. But compound pharmacy, compounding things so you know what all the ingredients are important.
So the challenge I was facing was I have Graves' disease, which is a autoimmune disease, and it affects my thyroid, which affects my hormones, which just affects a lot of different things. And I've had it for a long time, possibly as long as I can remember.
And how has that affected your life?
When I'm not on the medicine, it's just been, it was awful. I remember I dealt with a lot of depression in the 7th grade when I came off the medicine, and it gives me anxiety, or makes me feel depressed, or just some combination of both, and it affects my muscles, my strength, my confidence in groups of people. It can give me acne, it can do all sorts of things to my body, and I'm just really happy that I'm reversing the effects of it now.
So you mentioned in grade 7. So, how bad did the depression and anxiety get for you?
It got pretty bad. I had thoughts of suicide. Depression was really awful in 7th grade. And it was a culmination of factors, but the main problem was definitely with my thyroid. And as soon as I finally talked to my parents about it, we got my medicine dose. Or we talked to my conventional doctor, and they gave me some medicine for my thyroid.
So you have an overactive thyroid?
Yes.
Did they talk about operating and taking it out, or
They
using radioactive
did.
iodine? Did you do that?
Mm-hmm. And it failed the first time, actually, the dose, and I had to do it again. And that was also something that I wish I hadn't done, just because it would have been a lot better to reverse it through the holistic means and just keep my thyroid in the first place. I feel like by removing my thyroid, that also caused a lot of problems for me in my junior and senior year, because you have to go completely hyperthyroid in order to receive the dose of radioactive iodine, and then you have to go the opposite way, completely hypothyroid. And I wasn't able to run in cross country my junior or senior year as a result of it. So it definitely affected my high school life.
That was disappointing for you.
I was performing really well in my sophomore year, and I was sure I was going to make varsity, but I wasn't able to compete almost the entirety of my junior year season. And then coming in senior year, I couldn't compete for, I think, the first 2 meets, and then after that I really got into it, but I was still not what I used to be. I finally broke my record from sophomore year, but again, just not what I used to be. Not what I thought I would have been.
Still weighs on you a bit heavy, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, I feel bad for the situation you're in. Obviously, you're so young, and then when you got presented with taking out the thyroid, it was radioactive iodine that did it twice, which is also the worst way to take it out, which you know. But for you to find out the knowledge that I mean, it sounds like you said that you think that you could have saved your thyroid. It didn't have to be killed. I mean, do you believe that? And how
I truly believe that. Dr. Rube said that he said that he could have probably reversed the effects, because if there are no antibodies, there's no problems with the thyroid. So by going on this holistic diet, I would no longer have had antibodies in my system, and my thyroid wouldn't overreact like it did. So he thinks that he could have saved my thyroid.
Dr. Daniel, thank you for doing this with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's awesome. And we are really excited about learning some of your unique skill sets in combating disease. Just throwing a curveball here at you, what made you interested in getting into understanding the body and helping people with their health?
Yeah, so I think like most practitioners that end up coming to functional medicine is we have oftentimes our own health journey that we encounter along the way. So I actually was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease right before med school. And I'd been working on a book about food and stress, and in that research had realized, all of the, non-obvious ways in which our system was kind of perpetuating dysfunction. And then here I was, suddenly finding myself with my own health crisis, and that led me to wanting to, figure out how I could reverse that process without needing to be on a medication my whole life, as I was told I needed to be on in order to control the symptoms. So I came to it through my own health crisis.
Wow. And so you were just young when some of the health challenges started.
I was 20, just before my 28th birthday.
Yeah. What was the condition again?
Hashimoto's thyroid disease, which is the most common autoimmune disease and even more predominant in women.
What were the symptoms for you?
So I was working in the finance world, and my days were 12 plus hours, and I would try to break up my work day by going to the gym in the middle of the day so I could keep my energy up and get a little change of pace before getting back to my desk and sitting for another how many hours in front of my computer. And I noticed it was a Friday afternoon, and I hadn't gone to the gym yet. It was a little bit later, and I was like, gosh, I'm feeling super tired. So I went and I got, I went to do my like warm up, which is a bit of cardio before I did, some strength training and stuff like that. And I could barely like move the pedals down on the elliptical trainer. And I wasn't sure what was going on. It was just this strange feeling. And so I got off. I tried to like do, some other exercise, and I couldn't keep going. And I walked back down the stairs of the gym, got back to the office, and I almost felt like I was getting sick, like I was gonna get a cold. And that lasted for like several weeks, and I never got the cold. And so I ended up going to my primary care person at that time, and I was like, I'm just exhausted. And it seemed to have happened out of the blue. I was working this job, I had to be up for market hours, be there at 6 a.m., had no issues, I was young and healthy and active and all these sorts of things, and suddenly I wasn't able to actually do my day in a normal way. And so I luckily, and this was lucky because I see a lot of people who don't get the appropriate testing right away, she actually tested me for thyroid disease, including the antibodies, and it was blatantly, obvious objectively, in terms of the data, that's what was going on. And so I feel almost lucky in the sense that the diagnosis happened quickly. It's just that I was handed, a prescription, and that was the end of the story. And I ended up finding my way to somebody who was doing what I do now, to start on the path of understanding how all these pieces fit together that yielded a malfunction in my immune response.
Wow. And so early 20s, this hits, and Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease. It is, like you're saying, the most common of the autoimmune diseases. And I think that from what you're saying, this is happening, and it's just affecting, obviously,
my life,
areas
yeah,
of your life. Because so you had a career that was taxing for you, and you in a relationship at the time?
I was just ending one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that would have been super stressful.
It was, and I went to a homeopath on this journey, and one of the interpretations from the homeopath was that was, played a role in the sense of, the straw that breaks the camel's back, the stress event that triggers the underlying imbalances to emerge, and that's also a concept in functional medicine. And so, I was in the middle of a breakup when the symptoms started.
You mentioned about your Graves' disease affecting your high school life. You mentioned suicidal thoughts. When did they start, those suicidal thoughts?
Well, the suicidal thoughts were around the 7th grade, because that's when I dealt with the worst depression I had. They pretty much went away. I really, after talking with my parents over it, and we made sure that to keep my thyroid regulated. But I definitely dealt with a lot of social anxiety throughout high school, which I would say at least some of it was a result of my thyroid. And I noticed that at times where my thyroid was just not in the right, what's the word, but it's not producing the right amount of hormones, like especially during the times where I had to get it removed. Those were pretty miserable times for me. I would lose a lot of weight when I was hyperthyroid, and then gain it really fast back when I was hypothyroid, but feel really sleepy or just glum and just terrible.
Wow, that's interesting. And again, I want to come back to the suicidal thoughts, because there's a lot of kids going through suicidal thoughts, and there's obviously not all because of Graves, the thyroid, but I think the big question a lot of people aren't asking is this happening to my child because of health reasons, and then if they think the child has depression, it must be a problem inside their brain. They must have a chemical imbalance. What do you think about that philosophy?
I think it is true that depression can be a result of a chemical imbalance, but I think there are a lot of environmental factors that go along with it that may have been going on at the same time just at school. But I think that, at least for me, that's what it was, the chemical imbalance. And one of the things that really brought me out of that depression was starting to exercise, actually. I got a pull-up bar that Christmas, and that beginning to exercise and like the results from using that over and over and over again, that was like, that really brought me out of depression and like helped bring me back to normal. So just like natural things like that, exercise, that really helped take me out of depression.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you notice being happier once you go into an exercise routine?
Definitely. Oh yeah. Noticeable. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you're fairly active, being a young guy, going to school, this lot of kind of walking around between classes and I don't know, whatever else you're doing, but it still wasn't enough. Is that right? Like exercise? Because it sounds like you weren't doing enough exercise in order for that to be a problem.
So, or you're saying I wasn't having enough exercise before before the pull bar? Yeah, for sure. I wasn't involved in any sports that semester in the 7th grade, so I wasn't really getting a whole lot of exercise. I was just kind of going to school and coming home and not really doing anything. I didn't really get a whole lot of exercise back then.
Interesting. And so then that affected you.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting back into exercise helped you to not feel depressed.
Definitely.
Tell me what the depression was like.
It's just a really awful feeling. It's like you just feel terrible about yourself. You don't really feel cared of by your friends or really of anybody. I mean, of course I knew my parents loved me, but it wasn't really enough to make me feel happy. I just felt like I wasn't satisfied with any of the relationships I had with any of my friends or anything like that, and I just wanted to be by myself, which ultimately didn't help. I mean, hanging out with friends, I feel like also helps relieve depression, just being around other people. And I think that my pull-up bar brought back some of my confidence, some of my social confidence, which helped me develop the relationships with my friends, which also helped me pull out of my depression.
Well, it's very interesting, and I want to just take you back for a moment to where you were, because you're mentioning the feeling. So you're cutting yourself off from these people. Like, it sounds like you're almost feeling like these people weren't good enough. They were not giving you enough love or support, or is that right?
Sort of. I felt like I wasn't. I just felt out of place, I guess. I felt awkward. Like, I didn't feel like it was their fault, but I felt like it was all my fault, is what I'm trying to say. I felt like me trying to make just any sort of conversation with any of them would be awkward, and I wouldn't be able to really go into any deep conversation. I just felt like I couldn't have a meaningful conversation with my friends. It was just it's a weird situation.
It took me a while to recover. It totally knocked me down.
And so emotionally and everything?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the features of low thyroid function is low mood, right? It's a process that reduces the function of the thyroid, which is the gland that runs the entire metabolic process of every cell. So everything that, has you running at a normal pace and functioning and flowing through life is dampened. So that affects your digestion, affects your, energy levels, affects your mood, affects your, your menstrual cycles, or your ability to, to your fertility, because it's the body's way of saying, things are not okay. We're gonna we're gonna dampen everything down so that you don't go about, life normally, so you can focus on whatever it is that's causing that, not okay message.
And so, because there's a lot of people that haven't got their thyroid disease diagnosed. In fact, it's interesting that there's a lot of cases of people being diagnosed with bipolar that just have a thyroid disease. This is super common, and there's so many misdiagnoses. It wouldn't surprise me if there's for every right diagnosis there's 10 misdiagnoses. Right. But I just want you to think for a moment of being in that state still. I mean, that was a while ago now. Yeah. And what it would be like to still be living in that place, because a lot of people are still there.
Yeah.
What feelings does it bring up to still, to wake up and still be in that body?
I mean, I was, young and single and living in San Francisco, and, had my whole social life and work life ahead of me. And I actually was on my way to med school. And I remember thinking too, I was like, how am I gonna get through medical school, which is notoriously, known to be sort of soul crushing in many ways, in the sense that it's a very intense process and very like time and labor intensive. And I think I was probably worried. I was frustrated about like the betrayal, like the bodily betrayal. It's like, why isn't it functioning the way it's supposed to? Yeah, sure. Let down, because it had been fine up until then. There hadn't been any obvious issues, and it seemed to just happen suddenly, which again in some ways was sort of a blessing, because I was able to have it identified relatively quickly. Rather than what I oftentimes see with even my own patient population, is that it takes them a long time to even get a proper diagnosis. But again, even that labeling doesn't say anything about the how or the why, right? It just gives you from a functional medicine perspective, it gives you a starting point in which to now begin to uncover the path that led to that occurring. Probably not. And even the first few years, because I started med school, and the first few years are in the classroom, in the lecture hall, and it's it's less intensive than it is once you get into clinicals. And so I had that time, to work on my recovery, and also in that process of trying to find a new path or a different path than here, take this pill every day and that's the end of the story. I was putting together the pieces for myself as I was also learning the medicine from that perspective, and I thankfully had that time, those few years of slightly less intense activity, and that dovetailing into my education, because I was getting an education through my own process while I was getting a formal education at the same time. Awesome. And actually made it, easier to understand concepts beyond what I was being taught, because I had my own experience and, inputs and changes and things that I was seeing results with, that would later influence my career path.
Yeah, wow. And so it everything turned on its head, and
Mm-hmm.
and so and right now, as we discover this solution that you found, so yeah, feel free to just really come into that joyful emotion and to experience it again. I mean, just to remember. I mean, when things turned around for you, what was that like for you?
I mean, I think it was gradual, right? So and one of the very first pieces was related to changing the way I fed myself, the choices I made food-wise, and up until that point, it didn't really occur to me. I felt like I could eat whatever I wanted, and it had no impact, and so that was one of the first changes that I made. But in the process, I also was trying to heal the underlying impact, and so gradually, as I was feeling better, and as my antibodies were dropping, and that reversal was occurring, I don't know how. I think I just there was a sense of relief, and definitely a kind of a point in time where I noticed the limitations that had been present for a few years were really not there anymore, in terms of trying to conserve my energy and allocate it in certain ways and manage things very narrowly so that I could, fulfill my responsibilities and obligations. And I found myself, getting back to a place where I had the ability to just have a normal night's sleep and wake up and feel okay, and be able to, go through my day. And
so you experienced that, you had that turnaround, and then what about your mood?
Hopefulness and positivity and positive outlook, and just being able to go through this intense training and not crumble.
Yeah, and that was happening, right? You were crumbling.
Oh, before, for sure. And like I was saying, too much, and just having this very narrow way of needing to keep boundaries around how I expended my energy. Very scarce.
And
how to conserve, in order just to get through things well enough.
And I think that can open the door to a scarcity mindset, which is, it's not enough money, not enough.
Right.
All these types of things, not enough, I'm not enough, I can't do,
Sure.
I can't. And it's not easy to live like that, because I think we're designed to be abundant and to...
Sure.
Yeah.
When I had suicidal thoughts, I would get, we have some kitchen knives, and I would get a kitchen knife out, and I would stand on top of the table, and I would just think about just falling on the knife, and I would just consider it for a long time, and I would be in tears, and it was just a very terrible experience that I can recall that happened a few times. But in the end, I would just put the knife down, and I would try and come to some sort of sense, but it didn't obviously solve my depression. But every day I would just try and ask God for an answer, ask God for help. And I think He answered my call in the best way possible, just through exercise. It just took some time. And even though that was a terrible experience, I think that by just being strong enough to continue and just get through it, and having the courage really to tell people, because that's one of the hardest parts, telling people about what you were experiencing. I think that ultimately saved me.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Why were you holding back sharing that?
It's a very, I guess, kind of, it's not a fun thing to tell to your parents, and I didn't want to upset them. Obviously, I feel like that's another one of my qualities that I think that I have, and it can be negative sometimes, but I try really hard to please people, and I think that contributed towards my relationships in middle school, and I try to please everyone, and that's not always possible. And to prevent my parents from seeing me from being hurt, which I know would hurt them, I refused to tell them for a long time about my suicidal thoughts.
You didn't want to hurt them, and you wanted to please them. And I wonder if you didn't want to feel ashamed or something like that?
I also didn't want to feel ashamed, yeah.
When you're standing on the kitchen bench and you're holding the knife thinking about jumping on it, and why were you wanting to do that?
I just felt like nothing was really meaningful in my life. Since I didn't have a whole lot of relationships that I felt were going well with my friends. I wasn't involved in any sports. I wasn't doing too great in school, which I think was also a result of my thyroid. Just nothing seemed to be going right for me, and I just felt terrible. I couldn't think of any redeeming qualities in my life. It was just the worst feeling I could ever experience.
And so you wanted that to end?
Yeah, at the time. I did. I felt it was just an awful feeling that I just wanted to just take away the pain and just end it all. But I realized how many wonderful things in my life were there when I finally told my parents, and they got my thyroid in check, and I started to exercise and just do all these other things and started to build stronger relationships with my friends and really open up to people. I think that when my relationships started to open up and I started to see the bright things in life, I feel like my relationship in God also brightened as well. I feel like I really just thanked Him for just still being here and just everything. I started to become more appreciative of the wonderful things in my life, including my parents and my friends who were there all the time, who were always there the whole time. I just really needed to open up to them, my best friends.
Sounds like you don't actually want superficial friends either.
No. I actually can't stand when people are just superficial, fake. I would rather have one real friend than 100 fake friends.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Man, you have such a fresh perspective on that whole thing, and I think it's because how close you came to death. and you realized that that whole thing was a part of a system that nearly took your life.
Yeah, I would say that definitely completely changed my life, because I realized like how special life is. And I also have a lot more empathy for people going through depression and just things like that. And because I understand how they feel and just like the awful feeling of depression. And I think that I really just hate to see people that are constantly like, where everyone is rude to them. I hate seeing that. I always want to go out and reach out to that person and try and be their friend, because I know how that feels.
Many autoimmune patients are aware that allergies are often associated with their condition. However, do they really understand why? Let's get to the root cause of what causes allergies to develop, and if it's possible to prevent or even reverse our allergic reactions.
So top solutions really when you're looking at the thyroid is figuring out, okay, why is the immune, like in Hashimoto case where the immune system's actually attacking the tissue of the thyroid, why is that happening? And there's 3 big causes that I've seen: toxicity, pathogens, such as like Lyme disease and other co-infections, and then I would also throw parasites into the mix as well too. So I mean, you could put parasites in the pathogen category, but really toxicity and pathogens as a whole are big sources of why people have thyroid issues. And then you don't want to discount, you also don't want to discount diet, that certain foods that you're consuming, potentially, synthetic damaging foods are actually negatively affecting the thyroid, or the body actually attacking it, like gluten, the whole molecular mimicry, basically.
So tell me about that when it comes to biomimicry. Can you please explain what that is, why that's important to understand, and what it can do inside the body?
Yes. So when I'm working with a nutrition client who has Hashimoto's, so this is autoimmune attack against the thyroid gland, right, Hashimoto's, it is critical that this person become absolutely diligent about avoiding gluten, all right? We think about gluten as being an autoimmune trigger for celiac disease, where the lining of the gut is attacked by the immune system, but it's really fascinating with Hashimoto's, where the structure of the gluten molecule is almost identical to the structure of the thyroid gland tissues. So if we have been over-consuming gluten and the immune system has decided that is a threat, and every time gluten is consumed, the immune system mounts an attack to wipe out that gluten molecule, now the immune system is going on the search, looking for every molecule of gluten in the body and scanning, and all of a sudden it finds this huge concentration of what it thinks is gluten molecules, the thyroid gland, right? And so the immune system starts attacking the thyroid gland. So in order to get the Hashimoto's attack to calm down and to minimize the damage, we've got to avoid gluten. And the thing that's astounding is the most recent research is showing that a single gluten exposure can have an immune response that lasts up to 6 months long, right? So people think, oh, I'm going to be gluten-free and protect myself, but maybe once a week I'll have pizza, right? And it's, some people's immune systems are healthier and still have a fairly normal function, and that may not be devastating to that person, but someone with autoimmunity, especially either celiac obviously, but Hashimoto's, it really has to become an all or nothing thing, right? If we're going to stop the destruction on the thyroid gland. The other thing that's fascinating is the biomimicry effect of type 1 diabetes. So there's different theories out there, right? So type 1 versus type 2. Type 1 being where the beta cells inside the pancreas are destroyed. And these are the beta cells that normally would produce insulin. When they're completely destroyed, then the body cannot produce insulin. So type 1, right? So the theories are that the beta cells in the pancreas are destroyed either by a virus or by an autoimmune attack. So there's some research now that's showing that that autoimmune tac could be linked to commercial dairy. The type of cows, the Holstein cow is the type that's usually used in commercial dairies, produces a casein that is of a variety that can stimulate that autoimmune attack. That protein structure resembles the molecular structure of the beta cells of the pancreas that produce insulin. So this comes back full circle to the raw milk and somebody having goats in their backyard or being a member of a raw milk share where at a small scale the cows that are usually used are either Jersey or Guernseys, and they produce a different type of casein that is more compatible with human biology. So, you know, dairy is not tolerated well by some people, and other people, they seem to have the capacity to tolerate dairy better than others. And so I strongly recommend, if somebody's going to choose to have dairy in their diet, that it really needs to be from a small scale dairy where they can verify the type of cow and the type of casein that's in there so they don't put their pancreas at risk.
Great, that's awesome. Now, anything else in regard to autoimmunity or thyroid disease in particular? It sounds like you've got quite a bit of awareness on Hashimoto's. Is there anything else you would like the viewer to understand when it comes to looking at natural ways to both prevent and put Hashimoto's into remission or reverse the disease?
Other than a complete diligence in avoiding gluten, I would say the best way to manage and minimize an immune attack on the thyroid gland is to manage your overall immune health, right? That would be the same as any other type of autoimmune condition. So minimizing the stressors to your gut, packaged processed foods, sugar, alcohol, stress, right? When we are under stress, our adrenal glands are pumping out excess cortisol, if they still can, and that cortisol weakens the immunity, the SIGA, in the lining of the gut. So there's a very well-known connection between stress and weakening the lining of the gut.
It's important to note that no hormone works in isolation from other hormones. They all function within a complex, subtle web of interconnectedness. Many hormones have an effect on the immune system, disease, and each other. There's little doubt that hormone imbalance can exacerbate or even induce relapses of dormant autoimmune disease. Women are afflicted with autoimmune disease at a much higher rate than men, which is a good clue that female hormone balance is involved in some way.
When somebody has autoimmunity, we know from a scientific standpoint that if you have an autoimmune condition, you going through perimenopause or menopause, or for the guy it'd be andropause, which isn't often talked about, but menopause or perimenopause, that if you have an autoimmune condition, it's going to be a rougher road, rougher journey through that. So really always looking at the body as a whole, and how can you heal yourself is an important thing. But hormones in general is big for just to feel good. So if you're deficient of estrogen, deficient of progesterone, you're converting things in the wrong manner, I mean, you can just feel like crud. You can just not feel well. And so hormones, reproductive organs, they're all connected. So if somebody's even having trouble getting pregnant, you want to look at ovaries, you want to look at uterus, you want to look at the hormone levels in the body. Hormones would be estrogen, and you want to also look at the estrogen metabolites. I generally like a dried urine test or even a 24-hour urine test, because that test is nice. I feel like it's more comprehensive than just the standard blood work, because really when you're looking at risk factors hormonal wise, if you're looking at uterine cancer, breast cancer risk, it's always the estrogen metabolite, the 4-OH, what they call the 4-OH estrogen metabolite, that then puts you at risk. Well, when you run a standard blood work for hormones, you can't actually look at the metabolites in the blood. So I like the 24-hour urine hormone, or also Precision Analytical has a test called the Dutch, and you can actually do it at home. It stands for Dried Urine Test Comprehensive Hormones. And what it'll do is it'll look basically at the whole chart of hormones. So we can look at progesterone. We can look at DHEA, we can look at testosterone, we can look at estrogen metabolites and how it's breaking down, methylation. We can look at how testosterone's breaking down. And it's really within that pathway you can have a better assessment of what's actually going on with the hormones. So assessing the hormones can help whether you're dealing with hormonal type symptoms, menopause, perimenopause, infertility issues. Usually lower progesterone just it makes it a little bit tougher for somebody to get pregnant.
One of the patients that came to see me was actually a girlfriend of a patient that's seen me for a long time. So he started dating this girl, and she was having some markers come up with her GYN exam, and the boyfriend was worried, like, hey, we need to do something else. We need to help you. And the GYN wasn't willing to help her. So, or not unwilling to help her, but wasn't able to help her. So she sits down in my office, and one of the first things she tells me is, I love sugar and I eat way too much of it, and there's not really anything you're going to be able to do about it. She had some pre-diabetic markers, some inflammatory markers, and some mood issues that she didn't really attribute to her sugar cravings, but as Snickers likes to make popular, the hangriness, the being hungry and being grumpy is a very real thing, and it's a hormonal imbalance. Whether it be insulin or estrogen or whatnot, those hormones are constantly feeding into each other. High insulin states always lead to high estrogen states in females, and high estrogen states are very irritating to the brain. They're kind of inflammatory to the brain, and people are more likely to get migraines. They're more likely to have mood, irritation, anxiety, heavy periods, or PMS. So that's how she came to me with many of those symptoms. And one of the first things we put in place was a ketogenic diet. I sent her to work with my nutritionist to help her get into a ketogenic diet. And she was absolutely amazed. I didn't see her until I think 3 or 4 weeks later. And so I was prepared to have the conversation of like, okay, how much did we cut down on carbs? Like where can we go? Because we've got further to go now that you've cut back a little bit. And basically she came in at the 3 or 4 week mark and said, I don't have any more sugar cravings. I've lost weight. I came off of birth control, and my mood is more stable. I didn't have a massive period. Everything's working better. And she's still seeing us, and it's been probably 6 months. She's not ketogenic any longer because she met a lot of her goals, and she's more on a balanced diet. But one of the most powerful things to her was that she didn't have the sugar cravings that she initially came to me on, that she thought she was just born with. She thought she was going to have those sugar cravings the rest of her life and not really be able to tackle them. So both her and her boyfriend were pleasantly surprised that she was able to reset her metabolism and have a healthier life.
In order for you to know whether you have hormone issues or not, you really just need to run a test. I like the Dutch hormone. It's pretty inexpensive. You can do it at home. And then it's going to monitor your hormones, and it's going to look at progesterone. It's going to look at DHEA. It's going to look at testosterone. And when we're looking at the pathway, understand that pregnenolone kind of sits at top. So there's a hormone called pregnenolone, and then above that actually is cholesterol. So where we always say cholesterol is like the bad guy, cholesterol is the precursor to hormones. So if you want to, increase your risk of cancer and you want to increase your risk of having low hormones, lower your cholesterol as much as you can. And that's sarcasm to not do that, right? So pregnenolone's at the top. Pregnenolone is a very smart hormone. It'll either pick to go into progesterone or it'll go into DHEA. So it kind of has that potential to pick and choose. So there's people that will take pregnenolone just to kick the whole pathway in gear. There's people that'll just take progesterone as well. There's people that'll just take DHEA, testosterone. There's kind of a whole slew to it. But essentially, we've got pregnenolone at top. That'll split into progesterone. And then the other pathway is a big pathway. So we've got DHEA, pregnenolone will go to DHEA. That'll go then to testosterone. And if your testosterone is low, you can have very low sex drive, very common in chronic illness. That's one of the first things that disappears is that sex drive when the body's not doing well, hormones immediately shift gears. So you've got pregnenolone, DHEA, testosterone, and then that testosterone will actually break down into what they call the alpha beta, and you want to make sure that pathway is breaking down properly. So like for instance, a guy's not at risk of like prostate cancer or something. But testosterone will then turn into basically get converted into estrogen. And this is kind of the danger of testosterone taking is when you take testosterone, you're basically taking something that's going to turn into estrogen too. So you have to be very careful on the hormone side. I think clinically, Like, I'm fine with people doing natural things hormonally as long as they've taken a look at their test.
I'm just, thinking about it, and it's like a puzzle that I've like slowly put together over time. And the beginning of it and the beginning of discovering and speaking for myself is, I don't think a lot of people get to that point. We're all trained to listen to our doctors and do what our doctors tell us. And I listened to my parents and did everything they told me to do. But who knew there was this whole other world about nutrition and food and supplements, and I didn't even know that existed. I didn't know that existed until I sought that out on my own. No doctor, I can't tell you how many doctors I've been to in my short time here, and none of them ever tried to teach me about any of these ailments that I have.
If you were to guess how many doctors, how many?
Definitely, probably 10 to 20 in just the general practitioner and endocrinologist realm. I've worked with only about 5 or 6 specialized endocrinologists. When learning about doctors in this, I think a general practitioner. They only ever gave me Synthroid. They tested only a very small amount. They actively test only a small amount of your thyroid. So there are so many different things about an individual's thyroid, but when you go to a GP, they compare you to the masses. So they test your T3, your T4, your uptakes, and that's it. There's so much more layered underneath that I didn't even know was there. And it really wasn't until I got on the internet and started reading about it did I start questioning my doctors, and they were unmoving. I remember being a teenager, like 18 years old, probably when I first started to really dive into food and health through food. And I can't tell you how many times I went from GP to GP to like ask, and they would be like, your diet has nothing to do with it, just take your Synthroid. And it got to a point where I was like, I would argue with doctors, and that's when I stopped. That's when I stopped and had to pull back and sought out more endocrinologists. But even them, they're unmoving. They know what they know, and some know more than others. And I would say if you're not comfortable with a doctor, and if you don't feel like your questions are being answered or you don't feel good, find another one. Don't be scared to do your own research, and don't be scared to tell a doctor they're wrong, because everybody studies a certain thing in their field, no matter, I think, who you are. And some doctors don't want to research with you, and they don't want to test theories with you, so you move on. And it wasn't until I found Dr. Osborne, and it was like a light at the end of the tunnel, like the gates opened, an angel sang, and I was like, you're the first human being I've spoken to about this that is teaching me things I didn't know and actually telling me things that I've learned are right. So, and not all of this is available to everybody. So being able to put this information out there for the masses is, I think, groundbreaking. Because even talking to people about this, it's like nobody knows about it, and nobody knows how to manage it. And even speaking to friends my age, or women I know that are older, or men, they talk about, how tired they are. And everyone chalks it up to, that's just your life, but it's amazing how many people have thyroid issues. And it's growing, I think, a lot because of our food, our air, our surroundings, and it's one of those things, it's like a silent wildfire. So if you don't feel good chronically all the time, I would question it and question everything about it and everyone about it.
Wow, up to 70 million Americans living with autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
70 million.
That's
only
mind-blowing.
320 million, I think 329 million people in this country. That's all, right? This is US. So you're talking as high as 1/5 of the population.
It's amazing. It's angering because I think hypothyroid and autoimmune disease is something that if we take it back to nature, or we take it back to like raw living, and take away so many of the additives and chemicals and things like that, your body balances again. I think it's almost like an illness of time, because our times have changed so much, and our food has changed so much, and we consume so many horrible things that we think nothing about, and this many people should not have this. And I think most of the people who have it aren't even aware of it. And one pill does not take it away or change it. It manages it, but it does not heal it. It does not change it. And healing it is, well, for me it's possible, I think. I don't know, and I can't speak for everybody. I'm an individual case, and I only know so many, a handful of people who actively know they have this and are trying to change that. But I have partially healed my thyroid over the past 3 years, and it's gotten better. So that right there to me is proof that it is possible to heal it.
Excellent. And so what's happened with your dosage of Synthroid?
It's gone down. So I have, I don't even know what my doses were as a child anymore. Those memories are fuzzy. But I say, for example, I think when I came to Dr. Osborne, I was at like 150, or I think it was about 150.
Say this again, if you could say, when I came to my holistic doctor. That way I can just start using that.
My holistic doctor, okay. So when I came to my holistic doctor, my medicine was, I think, at 150 milligrams. So now it's at 112, which for a thyroid patient, sometimes that number never changes, and sometimes it only changes by 5 milligrams, or it goes up. For me, it would like dance up and down a lot, like 150, 155, 140, and you kind of like do this dance back and forth depending on like what you're eating or what you're doing or where you're going. And so the fact that we've every 6 months or longer, maybe sometimes it's been longer between, to continuously take my medicine down, that's never happened, ever. I think it's a dance back and forth a little, but not that drastic of a change. So that shows me that with hard work, it's hard work. You can lower it, and my goal is one day to not take Synthroid.
It went from 150 all the way down to 12.
No. 112.
112.
Yeah.
Cool.
So if it went down to 12, hopefully one day.
That's off. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think like a lifelong journey though, and it's like a battle with myself, because I know I've been given the knowledge from my holistic doctor how to control it, but it's like you're fighting against a wave or something. Like, you know what to do, you know how to get out of it, but sometimes you choose to dive right in it even though you know you shouldn't. So that's how it yo-yos, and that's how it doesn't stay consistent, because you can only be so controlled for so long.
You're married, children? No.
I have 3 children.
3 children. Yeah, so that's a really, it's a huge transitional phase that you've been over the last few years, right?
And my 3rd is about to turn 1, and so with children it has made, it's spun me in a spinner. Like, children has made all of my knowledge come to light about this. And I don't think if I wouldn't have had them, I don't even know if I would be here.
Why are you saying that? The children did
having children, physically birthing children and having autoimmune disease is a whole subject in itself, because your autoimmune disease peaks and has highs and lows during pregnancy, and I never knew that. And every child has been different, and every child has physically changed me. And for first baby, I didn't know much, so I just kind of blew through it. The second child, it got really bad. I bottomed out, my thyroid crashed, and it took us almost a whole year to bring it back on board. That was like a year of hell. I would say the first year of my second son's life. And then by the 3rd baby, I was here and finally got the swing of it. So pregnancy and autoimmune disease, I think, is the whole subject that there's not a lot of information on it. And the doctors honestly were amazing, and they worked overtime to try to manage it, and they do with women, and I see it, and it's a common, They test your thyroid when you're pregnant. Every woman goes through it. But for me, I have such an odd case. My thyroidism dances between hypo and hyper. So it was just, it was crazy. So really childbirth is what, in a sense, healed me, I guess, over time.
Amazing.
So, when you have babies, your body just changes so much. And I would say on the marriage aspect of it, my marriage has not suffered because of it. I think when I was a teenager, on the libido aspect, I suffered more from it as a teenager because I wasn't aware of it. And even birth control and hypothyroid, there's so much link and connection towards that I did not know. So when I was a teenager, I had a severe loss of libido when I was like 17, 18 years old. And I've always been very in tune with that side of myself. Some people aren't, some women aren't, but that's something that has always come very easily and naturally to me. So I very much knew it was gone, and I was very hyper aware of it. And it wasn't until I changed birth control, and your birth control affects your thyroid, and a lot of women don't know that, and it makes your thyroid crash and burn pretty much. And I don't take it anymore, and I thrive because I don't take it anymore. So I would say birth control effects did affect my libido more than my autoimmune disease did. But without it, that is something that has thrived in my marriage. I think at the beginning, like when we first started dating when I was 19 years old, it was the lowest. But as my life has progressed, my relationship, my marriage has progressed, having children has healed it. If anything, it gets stronger and stronger the healthier and healthier I get. So I would say as a teenager, yes, it bottomed, and the more natural I've become, the better I eat, the more I exercise, supplements, and not taking birth control, it's at its peak for now. I mean, I have no idea where it's going to go the older I get. But the whole study of that to me is very interesting. I could talk to you about that.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting. And just while you brought up the children and birth and healing you, I've had information presented to me showing the correlation between having a baby and detoxification, because you can pass things on through to children.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any possibility of that with your children getting any of the challenges?
Oh, definitely. My oldest is 7, so she's getting closer to the age where how old I was. So I've always tested all of my children for thyroid issues ever since birth. So because when you have autoimmune disease, when you give birth, they test your baby for it when they're newborns. And then you do yearly checkups, and you just kind of keep an eye on it. And because a lot of children aren't diagnosed with it, but mothers who have it, they watch them more closely. So there's always a chance of that, but I'm so thankful that I have more knowledge on it, and I think I'll be able to help them more than I was helped. So, and my grandmother has it. I mean, my grandmother has hypothyroid. My younger sister has it and doesn't manage it at all, and she's a mess, and she won't take advice or take her medicine or really do anything, and but she's okay with functioning dysfunctional, so to each their own. But it's definitely, in your research, have you found that it's genetic or environmental more, or both?
With babies,
with people, yeah, like with the crossover effect, environmentally.
Yeah, like genetically predisposed but lifestyle induced.
Yeah, so there's always a chance, but I am giving them way better of a chance, I think, nutritionally than I was given as a child. So I hope that may change their chance of energy and awareness of their own bodies.
There's a massive issue with fertility. I mean, when you actually look at research, men's sperm counts are at an all-time low. And when you take a step back and you think about, okay, having a child, getting pregnant, male and female, obviously it takes to get pregnant, and actually look at from, how the body was designed, you have to be healthy enough to bear a child. So when somebody starts having a quote-unquote chronic illness, one of the first things that disappears is your sex drive, because if the body's not well, the body doesn't want to reproduce, right? The body is trying to survive in the moment. But look at what's happening right now in our culture, Jonathan. Glyphosate is everywhere. Where we think, oh, I'm buying organic, I'm not exposed to it. Glyphosate's in the rainwater. You know, we share one atmosphere on this earth that when somebody sprays in one area, we share it all over the place. Glyphosate's a huge one for affecting toxicity in general, will bring down sperm levels. But what does everybody carry around in their hand or in their pocket all day so they can stay connected to the world, right? Cell phones. Like and where do guys or dudes put their phone? Right in their pocket, front pocket or back pocket, like right next to their giblets, right next to their prostate. I mean, these are these reproductive sex organs that need to, you know, make sperm, which is usually a 90-day life cycle. So if somebody's not healthy, for them to get pregnant, it's tougher because the body is saying, we gotta deal with you first before we're all of a sudden gonna have a child. So clinically, I see fertility way down. You know, people being able to be fertile and have children, which of course then the industry, the fertility industry, right, or infertility industry, I guess you would call it, of trying to artificially inseminate and things like that. People, I mean, that industry is booming right now.
A lot of fertility cases that are pretty remarkable.
Well,
Yeah,
is infertility at an all-time high in this country?
I think so, and I think statistically it appears to be at an all-time high, and 50% of it is labeled unexplained. And what I've discovered just in my practice is that the unexplained aspect of it is very similar to all the other conditions that present, you know, in my practice.
And so are you seeing people get pregnant when they do the right protocol?
Yeah, so I didn't even finish that. So what happens is we fill in the gaps. We fill in the nutritional gaps. We actually, you know, help their bodies get rid of excess toxins, which end up, you know, going on to the unborn child if they remain. We fix or help support pathways that are genetically determined that are inefficient, you know, with simple micronutrient repletion, like giving people certain micronutrients that help, you know, biochemical pathways that are hindered operate more effectively. And then I look at subtle hormone imbalances that are not things that are picked up in the fertility world because they're a lot more subtle, but they're collectively enough to create that message that says, no, not right now, right? That's, the whole system's skewed to a direction that is not optimally functional. So if you restore all these pieces, you give new information, the body's able to reorganize itself in a way that's optimal and healthy, it does what it was evolutionarily designed to do, which is reproduce. You know, that's like part of our biological imperative. Like, we're born to be able to do that. It's only all this other impact that has gotten in the way that if you can address it and correct it, allows for that process to happen again, normally.
And you've seen it?
All over and over and over again.
So tell me what kinds of cases. Like
like one that most comes to mind, just because she delivered a few months ago, was a woman in her early 40s. She worked for a good, couple of years, and her case was really interesting too because there were not so obvious signs even in this other paradigm, but when we dug underneath it, there's lab evidence of immune dysregulation that hadn't yet become symptomatic. But on a biological level, which I kind of separate from the cognitive level, there was enough imbalance that her body was knowing that it needed to negotiate and navigate that process even before she manifested symptoms. And she had gone through various fertility treatments and been unsuccessful, and had no real diagnosis as to why. It was in that unexplained group. And we peeled back the layers bit by bit. She worked really hard, in terms of just I guess even like sort of trusting the process, because the thing that actually, you know, sort of threw things off initially was that she didn't have very many symptoms that we would typically see of this, you know, in this objective data. But when we addressed it and corrected it, she conceived naturally, all on her own in her, you know, at age 41, and went on to have a really healthy pregnancy and, you know, a really sweet little baby boy.
No problems.
No problems. So just like those stories happen over and over again.
So if somebody's having fertility issues, if they're having autoimmune struggles, you still need to deal with the upstream sources to get the body well. And when the body heals, it heals, everything heals. It doesn't pick and choose, oh, I'm just gonna heal the shoulder now and everything else will wait. It's like, no, when the body heals, it heals. And when the body is healthy, it's ready to give birth or to procreate, right? To have offspring. And that's really the goal, is let's get the body overall healthy. So instead of, okay, you're not fertile, you've been trying, you know, for 8 years to try to get pregnant, now you're going to a clinic. It's like, well, in that time, has anything been done overall to actually help your health, to actually improve your overall health? And that's the shift I believe we need to make, is not, you know, using a treatment to try to get pregnant, but to look at overall body health. And if we improve the health, I think fertility issues will diminish, and, you know, obviously people will be more fertile.
Most of the people I see come to me after they've failed traditional treatment. They failed a convention. They're not conceiving through all the other fertility methods that they've been trying, right? That they've been spending thousands of dollars on. So, and it's because we're smart. Our bodies are smart.
This is moving for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Why is it moving for you?
A couple reasons. One is that, you know, as opposed to trying to force something into being that is, you know, going against an intelligent biological process, right? So, you know, if we look at things like IUI or IVF, you're trying to trick the body into overcoming a really elegant, you know, message that it's putting out, and trying to force something that's just not, you know, reasonable, as opposed to actually providing the, you know, the building blocks and removing the barriers that allow it to unfold and find, you know, this beautiful state of balance and being that allows for these natural processes to occur normally. And at the end of it, you get a new life. You get a new you get a baby. Like, there's nothing better than that.
And you've seen that happen with more people than that woman?
Almost universally, every single person I've worked with, if they are committed to the process, they all get pregnant and have healthy pregnancies and have healthy babies. Wow. So over and over and over and over again. So,
really?
Yeah, I would say statistically, like 80+%. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then that 20%.
They gave up.
I was gonna ask that.
Yeah, they gave up.
Did they give up?
They didn't commit to the process. They maybe, you know, dipped their toe in, or maybe they went a little bit further than that. But, you know, sometimes course correcting takes, you know, it's peeling back the onion, right? It's peeling back the layers. So if the initial layer wasn't enough, there's more work to do, right? Sometimes the initial layer is plenty, and the body's able to self-correct just by addressing that piece. But sometimes the impact is deeper than that, and you have to go deeper than that and look at some of these other more nuanced impact points and undo them, right?
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And then considering then the other 20%, if they all had fully applied themselves and not given up, then
there's nothing to biologically indicate that they wouldn't be successful. Like, right, we still had evidence of, you know, even objective evidence of imbalance, where, you know, a conventional doctor might look at it and say they don't see anything. But I'm looking at, you know, like a fine-tuning and optimizing and allowing, you know, this, you know, orchestration of really complex processes to work together. Well, the first message that people get is, oh, you know, you're this age and you've been trying this long, there's an equation for that. And the equation says you have to go do this right away. You have to do this intervention right away or you'll never have a baby. And then the intervention fails, you know, at least 4 times out of 5 or 8 times out of 10, right? The statistics, or less than that, right? Every round of IVF has about a 16% success rate. And so then they're told like, well, you just have to keep doing it. Right? But the initial message is, this is, you know, this equation says that it can't happen unless you do this. And then there's fear, and there's disempowerment, and then there's all of that impact. I mean, we know even from even data-wise, you know, the number of women who have early pregnancy loss, their cortisol levels compared to women who maintain pregnancy is 30% of women who maintain pregnancy have excess cortisol levels, and 90% of women who have early pregnancy loss have excess cortisol levels. And that's like stress, right? You're saying this can't happen unless you do this, and you know, they feel broken. They feel like there's something seriously wrong, and only this technology can make it happen. And that's not always so much the case. I mean, how many rounds is that? 5 or 6 to get to 100%. It's a lot.
And stress is inevitable when hope is lost.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the major points of success that I have is that instilling that hope and giving them the like insight that they can get better is what makes them, partly of what makes them successful. It's not even so much like, I mean, the protocols are helpful, but it's the idea that they're able to that actually allows them to succeed, to resolve their health.
What's a few things that somebody could do that was wanting to fall pregnant? What's a couple of things that they could assess as being triggers that are causing infertility, and a couple of things that they could start doing that would help, you know, their body to be a great nurturer of new life?
Yeah, so I would go back to what are the sources, right? What are the underlying sources of your health issues, and address those and deal with them. Toxicity is a big epidemic. Pathogens like, you know, Lyme and co-infections and parasites are a big epidemic. So remove the toxin, clear out the bad pathogen, body has a healthy environment. Now on the other side of it,
what about EMFs?
Oh, EMFs are a huge category. So EMF, or it's really the technical term we'd say is EMR, electromagnetic radiation, is more of the scientific research category. EMF is still a popular buzzword, but cell phones around you, Wi-Fi on, Bluetooth. I mean, literally in my house about 1.5 years ago, I had an EMF guy come in and analyze it. And in my office alone, I had the Wi-Fi router, which had 2 different Wi-Fi signals, like 2.4 and 5 gigahertz or something. And he looked at it, because I'm in a little 1,200 square foot place. You've been there. Pretty small house. And he's like, this is an industrial router for like this tiny house. I'm like, yeah, but it's fast, you know, because I like technology. So I had this router about 6 feet from my head. I had a Sonos Wi-Fi speaker right next to that. In the closet, I had a printer that was Wi-Fi. I had my laptop, which was connected Wi-Fi, even though I was right next to the router. I then had that on a stand, so it's ergonomic, right? So I'm not like hunched over. But then I had a wireless keyboard and mouse, which was Bluetooth. So I had Bluetooth on, Wi-Fi on. He came in with the meters in my office. He has like three different settings. He turned it all the way down, and he's like, Dr. J, it still says off the chart. I can't even get a number. It's so high in here. And I started thinking, I'm like, is that why I get tired? Like by 4 or 5 o'clock at the end of the day, like this, electromagnetic radiation that's just constantly stressing me out. And sure enough, it's a hard switch, when you say get rid of Wi-Fi, get rid of Bluetooth, get rid of the wireless thing, because wireless is so convenient, right? There's not wires everywhere. But when we did that in our house, we made a decision after he came in with meters. I'm like, okay, we got to do it. Immediately, my daughter started sleeping through the night. Our house was peaceful. It immediately changed the environment. And it was at that point, I'm like, you know what? EMFs, EMR, electromagnetic radiation is a big issue. And it's a big stressor for somebody trying to get pregnant too. So at minimum, shut your Wi-Fi router off at night. You can go get one of those Christmas light timers or like a fish tank, light timer where it turns it on every morning at, 8 a.m. or shuts it off at night, every night at 10 p.m. I think that's a first starting spot, for you listening. Just go get a timer, shut it off at night minimum. But the long-term picture is, let's get rid of the wireless technology, because anything that transmits wirelessly is creating electromagnetic radiation, which then is just another stressor. It's another thing to fill our buckets up, to more likely to tip and cause autoimmune issues, to cause, all kinds of different things in our body. And it's really cool if you actually Google EMF or even EMR and Kirlian photography, you can actually see what Wi-Fi looks like from a photograph. It's actually pretty scary when you actually see it. Because when you can't see EMFs or EMR, you're like, oh, it's not a big deal, right? I got my phone in my pocket. Yeah, whatever, Dr. J, I'm moving on. But it's these stressors that they tip the bucket, And if you're somebody struggling right now, you have to remove those stressors to get well. Remove them, and I promise you will heal faster from that. Thank you for watching this episode. Hope you got a ton of value from it. Highly encourage you to as well support this mission. Take this home with you. But we will have more to come, and just so excited to keep for you to keep learning, growing, and as I always say, the elephant doesn't get eaten with one bite at a time, is how you really eat an elephant. So keep plugging away, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next episode.
What a benefit it's been to learn more about how our hormones are affected by our diet, and how hormone imbalances are the root cause of many autoimmune disorders, especially thyroid malfunction. We hope that you can take some of the things that you've learned from this episode and start making changes today in your own life that can benefit your health.